order, and we'll start again on our next agenda item this evening. If we could have quiet, that'd be great. So this is the calling of the site for the location of the new Canada Water Leisure Centre. The way I would like to propose to run this is, first of all, draw the committee's attention to the reasons for the calling, which obviously are a focus for tonight's session, and reviewing those reasons and testing those reasons. We have three organisations or groups of people represented here this evening who'd like to come and address us directly to give us their views. I think if we take them in turn, if you come up and speak to us and just give us a blank sheet of paper, tell us what you think of the decision and how things are going from your perspective. We take those one after another without questions, I would say, and then we hear from the Cabinet member. We then have questions to the Cabinet member, and then if there are any further questions that people have, either to people who've come to speak to us, or if there are any questions from the people who have spoken to us to the Cabinet member, we can do that as well. So that's how I propose to carry out this session. So the three organisations that I have noted down here are residents who live next to the current Seven Islands location. Somebody correct me when I get this wrong. Those who live next to the preferred proposed site, and also the Canada Water Consultative Forum. So I think it would probably be sensible if we first took the Canada Water Consultative Forum. So are they here? Yes, there we go. Fantastic. If you'd like to just come up and sit, if you could sit here, it just helps with the filming of the meeting. 5 minutes or so. If you've got something to hand it out, sure. We'll pass it round. Yeah, there we go. I'll do this. I don't think we've got as many of these. We've got two of them. Not for sharing. Okay, well, if you'd like to first introduce yourself, welcome to, and thank you for coming to speak to us this evening. If you'd like to introduce yourself, and then just 5 minutes or so on your perspective on this particular decision would be very useful.
Fine, thanks. Well, good evening. My name is Pauline Aidenwaller, and I'm the chair of the Canada Water Consultative Forum, an organisation that was set up in 2000 to consider all the major plans and policies relating to the regeneration of the Canada Water area. In our opinion, the decision to proceed with expensive consultation on the preferred site for the new Canada Water Leisure Centre is premature and based on a somewhat flawed report, and jeopardises further meaningful consultation on the wider master plan. I would very briefly like to explain the story so far relating to the community's aspiration for a new pool before detailing the reasons for CWCF's view that the decision is premature. Background. The residents of Canada Water area have been campaigning for a new state-of-the-art swimming pool for over a decade. The promise of an Olympic-sized aquatic centre with transparent walls abutting Canada Water Basin by BL Canada Keys and their vision for the area was a major factor in the community selecting them for the Canada Water Master Plan contract in 2003. Alas, the aquatic centre quickly disappeared from the BL Canada Keys 2003 scheme. The community were very hopeful that their aspiration would be fulfilled when BL acquired 100% interest in Surrey Quays Shopping Centre and Harmswood Quays sites and commenced their master planning exercise in 2013. The community's optimism was further increased when King's College expressed an interest in moving a faculty to a portion of the former Harmswood Quays Printworks site and providing leisure facilities for the community as well as their students. BL have held numerous high-level conceptual consultations with the community. However, in spring 2015, BL announced their acquisition of the Mars Leisure site, and as a consequence, they would be reviewing their master plan ideas as their land holding in the area was now over 45 acres. The new master plan would be subject to consultation in autumn 2015. Hence, there was considerable surprise within the community when in July 15, CWCF happened upon the LBS issues paper regarding a preferred site for the new Canada Water Leisure Centre. Councillor Williams confirmed at CWCF on the 6th of July that LBS had indeed identified a preferred site within the 45 acres. The site was currently on the Surrey Quays wildlife area, abutting the London Underground rail lines and tunnels, next to Hopfield Place, Highgrove and China Wall Mews dwellings. The vast majority of the community were incredulous. The community's opinion was that this was the most inappropriate location for their long-awaited and much-needed community facility. Not only were there likely to be major construction issues, the impact on the adjoining residents and the destruction of the Surrey Quays wildlife area was totally unacceptable. It was also a departure from the Canada Water Area Action Plan. Figure 24 clearly shows the landscape buffer to the 3 streets. The community are also of the view that to legally ring-fence a preferred site and the related rerouting of roads, etc., in order that buses could pass by the preferred site, imposes serious restrictions on any further consultations and discussions on the wider British Land Canada Water Master Plan. Specific issues relating to the call-in of the report. As already stated, in our opinion, the decision to proceed with expensive consultation on the preferred site is premature and based on a somewhat broad report and jeopardises further meaningful consultation on the wider master plan. Our reasons for reaching this opinion are as follows. Lack of evidence as to why LBS preferred the site. There is no appraisal and comprehensive evaluation of all the alternative sites that were considered or may be available in the near future. There is no supporting evidence in relation to the minimum requirements for the leisure centre as set out in paragraph 9 of the report, that the elderly, disabled and school children have been consulted as their needs, i.e. something like a hydro pool has been considered, that existing accessible leisure provision in the area outside the AAP has been analysed, and that users across all 5 wards have been consulted on their requirements. Evidence to support how the estimate of 400,000 users per year of the new facility from across the 5 wards has been calculated. Evidence in the report in relation to other swimming pool and leisure facilities accessible to the residents of the 5 wards, namely Livesey, Riverside, Rotherhithe, South Bermondsey, Surrey Docks. Exhibit C that I've handed out shows the area that we're talking about in the context of Southwark as a whole. Evidence to show that residents of the 5 wards will use the Canada Water Leisure Centre as opposed to other facilities, i.e. Elephant and Castle, Greenwich, Lewisham and others that are in the pipeline. To date, there's been no public consultation on the preferred site proposal. Without this information, it's not possible, in our opinion, to make a judgment. TfL are notorious for protecting their infrastructure. LBS would be unwise, in our opinion, to legally define a preferred site without a formal undertaking from TfL that they will agree to the rerouting of buses along the realigned Deal Porters Way. There is no information in the report in respect of the timescale and costs for rerouting and reinforcing Deal Porters Way, should such an agreement from TfL be forthcoming. There's no evidence that TfL have been being in agreement that such a structure as a swimming pool could be built so near to the overground track, tunnel and ventilation shafts. The response to CWCS FOI indicates that LBS have had little consultation with TfL on this subject. Pedestrian access routes for the predicted 400,000 users appear to be via Hopfield Place, turning this very quiet residential cul-de-sac into a major pedestrian route. The report is, in our opinion, misleading in paragraph 18, describing the vegetation to be destroyed. The preferred site is the established Surrey Quays wildlife area, see Appendix Exhibit A. The preferred site is also part of the green corridor, see Exhibit B. Lack of transport consultation. To date, the Canada Water Master Plan public consultations have been carried out solely by British Land. They have been at a conceptual high level. No consultation on either the location or specification of any particular building has occurred. A leisure centre in the preferred location is likely to be airless and have very little natural light, quite different from the current Seven Islands, which has floor-to-ceiling windows on both sides and overlooks a garden. To determine the location of a large and very important community leisure building and rerouting roads at this early stages imposes unnecessary limitations on any further consultation on the wider master plan. There is no evidence in the report in respect of the ongoing running of such facilities. LBS tends to lease out such facilities, usually to Fusion. If this is so, then it would seem to be at odds with the statement referencing the Cabinet report on the 18th of November, which talks about parameters for negotiations with BL as being the Council will require the site in its ownership for a new public leisure, including the pool. There is no evidence that other options have been explored, such as contracting B, British Land, or A, another, to build and run such a facility in accordance with LBS policy. What LBS policy states that LBS do not want to have dwellings and commercial units above a pool. Lewisham, to name but one local, and Greenwich, to name but a couple of local authorities, seem to have successfully achieved this arrangement. It is therefore questionable that it is vital for LBS to decide on the preferred site before entering into an LBS British Land Development Agreement. Value for money and departure from the AAP. There is no evidence in the report as to why it is not value for money to rebuild on the current Seven Islands leisure site, or that it is not possible to continue to operate Seven Islands whilst constructing a new pool alongside the existing pool. The Seven Islands site has been home to baths for a very long time, and the site has a very large ground floor internal garden and courtyard, which is of similar size to the existing pool. The Canada Water Area Action Plan, figure 24, indicates that the landscape buffer to Hopfield Place and residential properties. Why has there been this change? And the AAP also states that we would extend the life of Seven Islands for up to 10 years. So there's been quite a change in AAP policy, and this was not mentioned at the EIP, which occurred not so long ago. We therefore reiterate our contention that the decision to proceed with expensive consultation on the preferred site is premature and based on a somewhat flawed report. Such a decision would, in our opinion, seriously jeopardise further meaningful consultation on the wider master plan.
Thank you for that detailed description of your position. I'd now like to ask the residents who live next to the existing leisure centre site. Welcome, thank you for coming this evening. If you'd like to introduce yourself and similarly, let us know your thoughts on this issue.
Thank you very much. My name's Tom Holder. I live on Lower Road. I have a handout, but I'd rather give that at the end of the speech rather than at the beginning. Thank you very much for having me here and inviting me to speak. I'd first like to say that I'm actually really excited about many of the plans going on for Canada Water. The regeneration is really promising, and I look forward to a new Surrey Quay shopping centre, things like that. So there is a lot to be excited about. But I do have significant concerns, as do the local residents who live around Seven Islands Leisure Centre, about the plans to essentially demolish it. A few weeks ago, I conducted a survey of around 120 local residents who'd be directly affected by the current proposals. So this included people living on Lower Road, Amos Way, Gom Road, as well as Hoffield Place, Highgrove and China Hall Mews. So also moving to people who would be affected by the new location or proposed location. And the first thing that was very clear is that many people, in fact the majority, were completely unaware that there were any plans at all to remove the leisure centre or indeed to move it to another location, which is of obvious concern. So the first they were hearing about it was when I was doing this survey. The second thing is that not a single person I spoke to was supportive, not one. Just about everyone said they would prefer to see the leisure centre rebuilt on its current location because everyone would love new leisure centre facilities. I think we all agree that there's aspects of Seven Islands could definitely be improved, but everyone preferred to see a rebuild at the current location. Now, we're told that this is not feasible. A council response from August 2015 says they're moving the leisure centre because refurbishing Seven Islands does not represent value for money. And the evidence for this is given links back to a Cabinet meeting November 2014 report, which says that a full refurbishment of Seven Islands no longer represents good value for money because they're planning on moving the leisure centre. Now, this is an entirely circular argument. We're moving it because it's not good value for money, and it's not good value for money because we're moving it. So clearly something needs to be explained, I think, to the public before we can come on board with what is proposed. I know there's concerns about if they were to rebuild it on site, about it being closed for a period. The first thing I'd say is, having been a teacher in the past, I've seen schools rebuilt entirely without ever closing them to students on a single site. As has been mentioned by Pauline, there is significant space within the leisure centre which could be used to sort of build one bit, knock down its equivalent bit and move round. There was, this concern that it would take 3 to 5 years, I think one thing said, to build the location, that it could be out of commission. That seems very pessimistic, considering that both the Shard and the Emirates Stadium were built in less than 3. In fact, Elephant and Castle, which is obviously a new leisure centre, was built in around, will have been built in around 3 years, and they managed to have to deal with 500 medieval skeletons in the middle of that project. So I'm sure that could be managed either way. The current location is fantastic in that it's central, it's visible to a lot of people, and it's got 7 bus routes that stop within 100 metres of the front door. So you've got the 1, the 47, the 188, the 199, the 225, 381 and the P12. So we're not talking minutes from public transport, we're talking seconds at the moment. The location, as has been touched on, is of historical significance. So it was the Rotherhithe Slippers Baths in 1880, it became the Rotherhithe Baths in 1963, it became Seven Islands Leisure Centre in the 1980s. It is surrounded on either side by some of the oldest houses in Rotherhithe. And it being our home, we'd just like a much greater level of consultation to be going on. And if there is evidence that it doesn't represent value for money to rebuild in its current location, we'd like that information clearly shared with us. But at the moment, it seems that the best way forward is that we do go ahead with a wider consultation, which I know is being proposed. I think that's excellent. But that it's done so without a preferred location in mind, so that we really get a chance to discuss all aspects of this, including the possibility of rebuilding on its current location. That's all I've got to say, so thank you very much. And handed down.
Thank you very much, Tom. And so finally, if we could have the residents who are next to the proposed site. And again, welcome. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
And similarly,
So you can go around.
if you'd like to introduce yourself and then just give us your thoughts.
Hello, thanks for having me. I'm Catherine Whittaker. I live at Hythe Grove, and I started the Canada Water West Residents Action Group. Like Tom, I'm in favour of regeneration at Canada Water. However, the report's preferred site for a new leisure centre will disproportionately affect the residents of Hythe Grove, Hotfield Place and China Hall Mews, and I'm here obviously to explain why. Firstly, the effect on wildlife. A large part of the site is a wildlife area. If you have the handout, you need to look at photograph A. This, as Pauline mentioned, is part of the Green Corridor from 2010's Open Space Study. You'll see Hotfield Place marked on that map, and then the 2 other streets that I'm mentioning, Hythe Grove and China Hall Mews, are perpendicular right angles to Hotfield Place, cul-de-sacs on the edge of the site. So the Surrey Quays wildlife area contains mature trees on ground that has grown quite wild. It is extremely biodiverse, and we regularly spot wrens, blue tits, dunnocks and robins. It supports a huge variety of insect life, and my neighbours have seen bats. Foxes and squirrels are regularly spotted, as you'd expect. Cutting down these trees will have an ecological impact that cannot be mitigated by new planting elsewhere on the master plan site. It would take a generation for trees to reach similar sizes and for habitats to be established in the same way, if indeed any land is allowed to grow as wild as this land is. The trees also importantly provide a natural screen for the residents, an important amenity which shields us from noise, pollution and any future building work on the Tesco car park beyond. Secondly, proximity. Photograph A also shows quite how close we are to this site. We do not live in suburban houses with 30-foot back gardens. Every one of the properties here has a small garden, no more than a patio in many cases. The boundary of this site is hard up against us, only 5 metres from my next door neighbour's back door, for example. Other neighbours, one of whom is here tonight in Hothfield Place, are on a corner plot, which would be surrounded on 2 sides by a building, possibly only metres away from his side wall. Height is also an issue. The site is a storey higher than our properties, which means that either a building would tower over us, or, if it were to be buried in some way, the costs involved could be very high. We simply cannot understand why, in a development of some 45 acres, it has been deemed appropriate to build on top of the only properties which actually border this site. The new site seems to shoehorn a leisure centre onto a plot that's not appropriate. Tom mentioned visibility. This site is in no way as visible at the moment as the current Seven Islands Leisure Centre. And finally, roads. Building the leisure centre on the wildlife area presupposes the construction of a new road to allow school and disabled drop-offs and access by public transport. This is a huge concern to us because we all already live just off Lower Road, which is a very busy road. Tom's told you exactly how many buses go down it, 7 bus routes at the moment. We will become an island sandwiched between 2 roads. For Hothfield Place, there is also the threat of greatly increased foot and bike traffic as it becomes a through route for the expected 400,000 visitors to the leisure centre. For all these reasons, as a community, we cannot see how the proposed site could be thought of as ideal. We think consultation should occur before a preferred site is identified, and at the very least, we need to understand how and why this site has been chosen and to look at alternatives. My group believes that a much better option, even if it meant a period of closure, would be to rebuild the Seven Islands Leisure Centre in its current location. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, and now if we could ask the Cabinet Member to come forward and speak to us. I don't know if there's any officers also accompanying you. So welcome Councillor Williams, and again, as with the other people who come and spoke to us, if you'd like to give us your thoughts on this. I don't know if you want to introduce your colleagues.
Yeah, no,
as well.
of course. I'll shuffle up. So, yeah, thank you very much for inviting us here this evening. I'm joined by John Albert, who's head of Regeneration North, and Tara Quinn, full title, I can't remember off the top of my head, leisure manager? Sports and Leisure Centre manager. So I think if I just give a bit of broad background about where we're up to in our discussions with British Land, and I'll move on to the individual points that were raised by the residents, and then kind of happy to answer any questions.
Okay.
So as you all know, we're currently negotiating with British Land what's going to happen at Canada Water. There are 3 key, quite large parcels of land. There's the car parks, there's the Tesco store, the Surrey Quay shopping centre, of which we're the freeholder. British Land have a long lease on that. There's the Harmsworth Quay, former Daily Mail Print Works, which we're also the freeholder of. British Land have another freehold on that. And then there's the Mass Leisure Centre Park, which was referred to earlier, which British Land bought outright earlier this year. We're currently working through the negotiations for what's going to happen on all that land, and as was mentioned earlier, it's just over 50 acres, just under, actually it's over 50 acres, it's just under 60 acres. And what we've set out very clearly as a council in the Cabinet report of November last year, which was mentioned earlier, is we want to create a new place and a proper town centre which works for people who currently live in Rotherhithe and the surrounding area in Bermondsey, but also to attract new visitors to the area, people spending their hard-earned cash and supporting jobs in our borough. We've also very clearly set out that we want policy-compliant affordable housing, 35% affordable housing, and that the affordable rented element of that is council housing, owned by the council on council tenancies at council rents. We've also set out that we want a new leisure centre, 8-lane pool, a learner pool, a large gym, studio space, and a forecourt sports hall as well, which is an increase on provision of what's currently available at Seven Islands. And we also want job and training opportunities for our residents. sorry, fog, I'm afraid. And we also want to maintain a financial return to the council on an annual basis, because we currently get a proportion of the rents generated from Harmsworth Quay and the Surrey Quay shopping centre. So that's an awful lot of things to get out of one site, but that's what we think is the best thing for the area and for the borough, particularly on the council housing is key, the leisure centre is key, and getting a financial return to the council is really important as well, particularly with the cuts that we've already received. As you will know, 40% cut to our revenue budget over the last 5 years, and we've got another 30% coming out over the next 3, so some real challenges there. So we're currently working that through. British Land, as was mentioned earlier, are going to be going out to consultation later this year on the next iteration of their master plan, which will have a lot more detail on what's going to be coming forward. And leading up to that consultation, we as a council need to say where we'd like the leisure centre to go. So the IDM, which I signed a few weeks ago, has been called in for this evening, and I think it's really important to stress this. That IDM starts off the consultation process. It authorises John, Tara and the other officers to engage with British Land and engage with local residents and have that consultation on our preferred location, have the detailed design work take place with British Land and their architects, and also for that to lead into the British Land consultation. The way I see this as running is very much as an iterative process, where we have an initial meeting with local residents, particularly those residents Hoffield, Hythe, Grove and China Hall Mews who are directly affected by the proposal, to run through why we think this is our preferred location, and also to say what the other locations are that we considered, because there's a number. So that'll happen at the first consultation meeting, and then the intention is to have a second initial consultation meeting for people who live in the wider area to discuss that. We'll then take away the concerns that are raised by local residents and people from the wider area, and John and his team and Tara will work with British Land and their architects to work up a scheme, and then we can say to residents, we've taken on board the concerns that you've got, and this is what we've come up with, what do you think about that? But also to discuss the other locations that we ruled out and why we ruled them out, and if people agree with us. I hear what was said earlier, that we should go out and consult without a preferred location, but in my view I think we'd be being very disingenuous, because we've looked at the criteria that we've set ourselves and what we're trying to achieve, and for us to go out and say, you know, it's an open book, any one of these sites is a runner, would be disingenuous, because we don't think, for the reasons I've set out earlier, they would be, and the consultation is to run through all those reasons in as much detail as possible. So kind of that's where we are, and the final decision on where the leisure centre goes, and indeed on the whole package and the whole deal with negotiating with British Land at the moment, that won't come till earlier next year. And ahead of that happening, as part of the consultation, we'll also have full environmental impact assessment on the nature area, what's there, what's going to be lost, how can we replace that, but also through the detailed design process, which this IDM will allow to happen, can look and see, can a buffer zone be created, can a buffer zone be kept, how big could that be, and what's the knock-on for the rest of the master plan. So until we've got the public consultation underway, the impact assessments undertaken, and that detailed design work happening, we won't really, I don't think, be able to answer all the residents' questions, which is why I think it's key that we move to public consultation. I'm not sure if John or Tara want to join in and say
anything you want to add?
Cover anything I've missed?
No, not at this stage.
Okay, I've got a couple of questions from me to start off with. First of all, you touched on it there, but I just want to go back to this. Specifically, why, right now, does the council have to have a preferred site as part of this consultation? What is it about the negotiations with British Land that is making that necessary?
Okay. So later this year, British Land will be having the next detailed phase of consultation on the emerging master plan, and part of that will include more detail about what's going to be happening in each of the areas of the regeneration area and on each of the plots of the regeneration area. So we need to be able to say, this is where the leisure centre is going to be, essentially. There are a number of plots that were considered, both on and off the master plan area, and they were ruled out for a variety of reasons. For example, King George's Fields was ruled out because it's a park with that's very heavily used. Southwark Park itself, which was ruled out. Also, the Surrey Quays Water Sports Centre was. The Surrey Quays Water Sports Centre was also looked at, but it's just not big enough to fit on all of the facilities that we want.
So just flip it around. What would happen if a council went into this situation right now without a preferred site? If we went into a consultation without any preferred site, what would happen as a result? What would the negatives be?
I think just to separate out the two consultations that are going to take place, the consultation that we're talking about here this evening for the consultation on our preferred location, if we went ahead, we could go ahead without a preferred location, but in my view we'd be being very disingenuous for residents in the area, because the criteria that we've set ourselves for a variety of reasons, which will be fully discussed and explained during that process, has led us to this site being the preferred location that meets all of those, meets that criteria. There's then the wider consultation which British Land will be undertaking on the wider master plan, which the results of this consultation and this consultation feed into, so that people get an understanding of what the new town centre is going to look like. It's going to be significant development, and how the leisure centre fits into that. Just to pick up on a point that Councillor Al-Samurai just raised, it's a huge regeneration area. It's one of the biggest, if not the biggest, in central London. One of the criteria that's pushed us to this site over others is that we want a centre delivered as part of the first phase of the redevelopment, because it's obviously not all going to be done at once. So that instantly limits the number of plots that can be considered. So there's round Canada Water Basin itself, there's the site that we're talking about this evening. And one of the things that we've got to consider and balance off all the priorities that we have as a council and the benefits of trying to deliver for our residents is that if we were to put the leisure centre on, if our preferred location is on one of the plots around the basin, for example, the Tesco filling station or the overflow car park, it's some of those locations where, because of the strategic viewing corridors, we can have taller buildings. So if we were to have our leisure centre there, then we'd have to have residential above there, and we don't think from a management point of view it's a good idea. I mean, it was mentioned earlier, Lewisham and Greenwich and other councils do this, but we think they're wrong, and we don't think that's sensible from both a management point of view.
Hang on. We'll do this in order. We've had people indicating.
So we don't think it's right to have residential properties above a leisure centre for successful management of that site, and that the elephant and castle, they're next to each other, not directly on top.
Okay, I'm just gonna stop you there. I've got one more from me, and then Anoud, I'll put you on the list. I've got Rosie, Jasmine, and Lisa, and then Anoud. Last one from me. Let's say we go into a consultation with a preferred site as is currently set out. There is then mass public opposition from everybody who lives around the local area. Everybody's against it. Absolutely every single response to the consultation says it's against it. Everybody in the meeting is complete outrage. Would you then, as cabinet member, then say, okay, that's it? Because what we're hearing is, because we've got a preferred site, the whole thing's prejudiced, that can't happen, that the public won't be listened to. What's your response to that?
Well, we have to consider the views that came back and balance that off against the other objectives that we're trying to achieve, namely getting the new leisure centre, but also getting the new affordable housing and getting the annual return to the council, which helps support the services that our residents use. And just to finish off the point I was making to Councillor Al-Samurai's question, if we were to put the leisure centre, one of the things that's led us to this location, if we were to put the leisure centre on one of the plots around the basin, for example, that would cost us a huge amount of money in the renegotiation with British Land, because nothing's free and nowhere on that 50 acres is free.
Say that.
Well, developers may say that, Councillor Samurai, but it's true. And if we were to do that, we would lose council housing. We would lose financial return to the council, which will help prop up our services, which in the next 5-year period would have been cut by 40% and a further 30%. So that's what we have to consider. It's very difficult, but that's why I think it's crucial that the public consultation gets underway, the detailed design work following those first public consultation meetings happens, and then we have further meetings with local residents. We can get the environmental impact assessment and the other assessments done, and then get the discussions with TfL that will flow from that, and be able to take a fully considered view and a final decision early next year, probably in the late spring, over where the final location is going to be and the final package that we managed to negotiate with British Land.
Okay. Rose.
So I had a couple of questions, although I suppose they're sort of
linked in terms of, I guess, the concern that I have that I'm getting at. So firstly, we've heard a lot about the sort of ecological value of the site, and obviously there'll have to be environmental impact assessment undertaken as part of the planning process, and presumably for planning permission to be granted in the end. I mean, before deciding that you're going to put forward a consultation with this as the only preferred site, what kind of assessment have you made of the environmental and ecological value of the land?
To date we haven't done any, but that'll come as part of the detailed consultation, and the IDM decision that I took enables John and his team to have the consultation underway, but it also authorises them to undertake all the detailed work, which includes that.
I suppose my concern around that is that if there hasn't yet been any kind of environmental assessment, that what are the chances that we go through the whole consultation, you decide to press ahead with the site, and then the environmental impact assessment comes back and says that it's not, the impact is too severe, and it's not feasible to press ahead with it on those grounds. I just worry about obviously the time and the resource that's gone into a consultation, which then might then kind of fall down at that stage, when it gets to the planning stage.
So I think just on that point, whether we were to go forward with a preferred location or no preferred location, it'd be a similar amount of resource involved. And I think one of the things that will, I imagine, will come from the environmental impact assessment is the full range of biodiversity on the site, which we can then consider and feed into our negotiations with British Land about the wider master plan, because we do want an increase in open green spaces, in green links, green things, etc. And we've got to consider everything in the round in that respect, because it is, as we've said several times, it's a huge area that we're discussing.
And then, secondly, if that's okay, again, in terms of the feasibility of building on the site, in terms of firstly the kind of proximity to the London Overground Tunnel, and then also the other public transport links. I think that as part of the proposal you proposed rerouting the buses. Again, it says early feasibility work has been carried out. How extensive is that? Have there been early conversations with TfL about this?
So I'll start on this, and then John can jump in if I get it wrong. So we've got a lot of experience, and John's team's got a lot of experience of working with TfL, the Canada Water Canada Water Library. When that was built nearby, we've also got some near to the tunnel, and we've also got a number of schemes currently underway on our council house building programme along Albion Street. So we've got a lot of experience of working with TfL and being close to their assets. And the way the process works is that until you've got an idea and the details of what the impact will be and how close you're going to be to their tunnel or their asset, they won't really engage. So we need to have the detailed work undertaken so that we can have those informed conversations with Transport for London. It's a rough, it's not a rule of thumb. The way they operate is if you're 4 metres or more away from their asset, you don't need their permission or sign off. If you're in the 4 metre zone, doesn't mean it can't happen, but you need to have an asset protection agreement signed off to make sure that both your construction methodology and also the final structure itself won't affect the operation of that rail line. And also, it goes down to the amount of deflection of the rail track itself to less than 2 millimetres. Remember, 1.75 millimetres. That's the level of tolerance they work to. So at Albion Street, for example, we're building over the tunnel. So it's not impossible, but until we've got that detailed work done, we can't fully engage with them. Just on Deal Porter's Way, part of the proposal is, if we do move forward with this site, is that Deal Porter's Way, which currently has a kink in it, that will be straightened out and pushed back, which frees up more land for the leisure centre to be built on. The change in levels was mentioned earlier, so it will be possible to sink the building into the ground to minimise the impact and make sure there's no overlooking. But that new route, pushing Deal Porter's Way back, again, when we get to the British Land consultation later this year, we do want an increase in public transport on the peninsula and serving Surrey Quay Shopping Centre. That includes more overground services, more Jubilee Line services, pushing cycle hire over to the peninsula, but also includes having more buses run through there, and this is one place that could happen. And when British Land have that detailed consultation later this year, that will be the opportunity for residents to look at that impact and feed into British Land's emerging proposals. But I don't think it will be that people will be squeezed between two roads, because there will be significant difference in Deal Porter's Way already in existence, but we're just pushing it back. So I think I've answered your 2 points there.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, great. Jasmine.
Well, sort of on a similar vein, Councillor Williams, I think it's very positive, that we have to, if you think about free swim and gym, that's one of our key policies, and we're absolutely adamant, aren't we, that we want as many people to use the gym, and swimming facilities for free, to encourage the healthiness of the people in the borough. So, in one sense, I don't want to detract from the positivity of that in any way, but I think some of the evidence here is quite compelling around the need for biodiversity and the transport links, really. So I think, really, I think you've already said that, but what lessons can we learn from this, and how can we work much more in partnership with TfL and, people looking at the environmental impact? Because I think I'm a ward councillor for the Lane, and I've been looking at these issues in my own neighbourhood because it's quite a hot point of regeneration, and it's just amazing what people can do to preserve biodiversity these days in such a small space. So looking at some of these graphs, I can't believe that there's nothing that we can do to actually encourage wildlife and limit the impact of the building, really. So I think you've already covered that, but really what lessons can we distill from this in future projects and make sure that we because we've got quite a good lobby here and obviously good consultation group, how we can get that at the beginning as opposed to in the middle.
Okay. I'll just touch on the TfL point and talk about that in more detail. So we are working closely with Transport for London on how the peninsula is currently served and how that will be significantly improved as part of the regeneration agreement that we're working up with British Land, and indeed the area is an opportunity area in the Mayor's London plan, which is there for the very reason that we can work closely with the Mayor's office and TfL for this. And as Mr Holder mentioned earlier, Seven Arms Leisure Centre very well served by local bus routes. The preferred location is also quite close to Lower Road, quite close to the major transport terminus at Canada Water, also very close to Surrey Quays overground station as well. So it is also well served by public transport and people will be able to get there easily. On biodiversity, I think what's important is that this IDM decision that we're discussing this evening will allow all that detailed work to take place so we can take a full considered view and before we take the final decision. I think from a kind of a lessons learned, how things can be done better properly, I think that's probably, I'm looking at Norman as a legal officer, probably us or us all as councillors looking at our constitution and how our constitution's worded, because to enable John and Tara and myself and everyone to go out and consult with local residents and talk to them in detail, this IDM has to go through the system. So you get the initial 5-day representation period, then the 5-day call-in period. It's been called in to be discussed this evening, which kind of doesn't delays to a point the full consultation happening, but I think it can kind of sets a false expectation for some people that this is it, this is the decision, and there'll be no more discussion after this is signed off. When in fact it's starting off that process and kicking that process off. So I think maybe we need to look at our own internal processes to see how we can get this tidied up a lot more and be done in a much more straightforward manner in the future.
Yeah, and presumably we're quite assured that the people who have given evidence tonight, we can get them involved in some of the early discussions around the biodiversity, so it's not too late to do that.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
They take place, don't they, in different forums. You have the small group meetings and the wider consultation. But I think we've got such a lot of intelligence here. We should seize upon it straight away.
Absolutely, and the intention is that there's an initial consultation meeting for the residents of Hoffield Place, Hive Grove, and China Hall Mews who are directly affected by the siting of the preferred location. And then we have an initial meeting for the wider community, Canada Water Consultative Forum, and any other residents in the area. And that we then do the detailed work and come back and speak to them again. And the offer that I've made to everyone that I've spoken to is that any consultation events you want us to run, whether it's workshops, site visits, myself and Councillor Raj and Councillor Whittam visited the site this morning, we will run them and we will do them. But we need to get that process underway. We had the first meeting scheduled for last week, that's been postponed. but following this evening, and depending on the recommendations, we want to get the first consultation meeting in for the end of the month.
Okay, I'm gonna move us on because we've got almost every member of the committee indicating that they want to ask a question, and we do need to. So let's continue to have punchy answers to the questions as well.
Apologies,
yeah. Okay, Lisa.
Thank you, Chair. 2 questions, if
Yep.
I may. Councillor Williams, when Site A and B were developed, this was several years back, and the Cabinet, the executive as it was at the time, pressed very hard to have the library at the heart of the development. I'm not sure even if Canada Water Forum know this, but British Land at the time wanted it to be much further down the Albion Channel, much further from the tube. And we were able to press to make sure it was right at the heart, right by the tube station where it is now. And I think everybody would agree that that is the right place for it, and it's been hugely successful. And I just think if we were able back then to push against the developers and negotiate a prime spot for the library, should we be pushing a bit harder to try and do that now for the leisure centre? I know you and I met on the site this morning. We talked about, I guess, what you would call the opportunity cost of having the leisure centre in the overflow car park or in one of the areas around the dock instead of tucked away at this side of the site. The opportunity cost being if you put the leisure centre there, you can't put residential flats. And do correct me if I'm wrong, but the figure you mentioned was about £10 million.
It was tens of
millions of pounds for the opportunity cost. Now, this site is at least the area of this site in the councils where the council is the freeholder is 45 acres. Now that's a massive amount, a massive footprint, and I want to know which sites within that footprint of where the council is freeholder, so not St George Field, not Southwark Park, which sites within the freehold were considered before this site was added to the footprint pre-April last year, this year, because before April it wasn't even in the footprint and therefore wasn't an option. Or was the plan to refurbish 7 islands, and was the addition of this strip of the wildlife area the only way that you could negotiate a new leisure centre for this area?
Okay. So I can completely understand the question. I think the first important thing to mention is that the library site, and huge successful, second most visited library in London after the Barbican, so huge success, and all credit to the then executive for getting it built. And to the current executive for finishing it off. The cross-party working. That site was unencumbered by any leasehold, so we had that freehold. There was no leases sitting underneath that, so we could get on and build that. There's no encumberments on that piece of land. The other thing that's changed since then is that the scale of the redevelopment that we're currently negotiating with British Land, we are trying to get as much out of that as we can for the borough and for the local area. And one of the big changes I think there's been in the last few years is our significant commitment to build and increase our stock of council housing. And we all know, and we all have casework in our own water. We've got 12,500 families on the council waiting list. So one of the big things we want to get out of this development is policy compliant, affordable housing, and the rented element of that to be council housing in our ownership at council rents, as I mentioned earlier. So with taking that into account, the leisure centre and all the other benefits we want to deliver, if we were to put the leisure centre on one of those other plots, which are a lot more valuable from a land point of view than the plot that's our preferred location, we wouldn't get as many council houses, and we wouldn't get the return to the council if we had other development on those plots instead. So that's a huge thing for us to consider, because there is the impact on the local residents, and we need to do, if we go forward with this site, do absolutely everything we can to mitigate the impact, see if we can get a buffer zone in there, sink the building into the ground, have a green roof, no overlooking windows, etc. Improvements to Hoffield Place as well, because there will be an increase of footfall there. But we've also got to balance off the real, Lord Kerslake was talking about this earlier on this evening, the huge housing crisis we've got in London and getting those genuine affordable houses built. So
where was it going to go before this area was in the footprint?
So this area has always been in the footprint, but the other sites that we considered
it hasn't been on previous maps in the area action plan.
It was in the material that we put out last year, and they were included in the pack for this evening, but we can recirculate those if needed. We considered next to Canada Water Basin itself. We considered the
also Palmsworth Keys.
Part of Palmsworth Keys. and we also considered, and those were basically the sites in the first development zone, or first development phase, because we want it delivered in a kind of 5-year period. The other thing to consider is because it serves the communities of both Rotherhithe and Bermondsey, we didn't want to pull it too far into the 50-acre site, because then it'd make it further away from Bermondsey. So we felt that this site struck the right balance for all those reasons, but there is the impact on the local residents, there is the impact on the green area, which is why we need to get the detailed work underway so we can properly understand that before any decisions taken.
Thank you. Can I just ask my second one?
Yeah, go
Sorry, I
ahead.
didn't get that very brief, Chair.
Yeah, okay.
The problem that most people, including myself, have with the decision as it is, and that's why it's been called in, I think, is that there's very little supporting evidence in the decision for people to see that supports various aspects of the decision. By that I mean the sites considered. You said tonight what they were, but they're not in the papers. The reasons that they were dismissed, again, it's not there. Any evidence from civil engineers or surveyors, you said we can't fully engage with them, but actually there hasn't been any engagement. You haven't initiated any discussions with TfL either about the rerouting of any bus services or the road, or not
Okay, that's the
on
question.
our
We've got the
question.
question. Let's get the answer.
So I think on the, and I think maybe if there's, going back to Councillor Ali's point, if there's lessons to be learned from this IDM, maybe it's that we should put more information in the IDM report itself, but the IDM report was to allow that public consultation, which will have all of this detail in to be discussed with local residents. Maybe we should have just put all of that in the pack to begin with. But all of that will be run through in detail at the consultation meetings with local residents and the wider area.
Another significant omission, actually I haven't finished my question, but another significant omission is this evaluation of the wildlife area. The Council's Ecology and Biodiversity Officer hasn't even been consulted. The Council used to provide environmental impact statements with all of its decisions, and there's nothing there, and you said we can replace the wildlife, which I just think is a incredulous thing to say.
No, I can understand that concern, and as John just mentioned to me, and as we discussed earlier today, until we've got the detailed design, we won't know what the full impact will be, so we can't carry out the full impact assessment. What I'd like to see happen, if it's possible from a design point of view, is to keep as much of a buffer as possible, but until the detailed design work's been done, until we know what the impact on the wider master plan is of that work, we just don't know, which is why this IDM is really important, because it allows all of this work to begin and take place, so that we can have as much information, we can have all the information before the final decision's taken next year, probably around late spring next year, on the final location. I completely understand your frustration, but it's we want to get going, and so all this work can happen.
Anoop.
Thanks very much. Thanks also to the residents for coming along and for all the huge amount of work that I know they've put in, and I think that frustration that people feel that so many conversations go on with developers, and yet the first residents in a very active forum hear about something is when they actually go through some paperwork in July, and I think that they actually deserved an apology that they hadn't been alerted and they had to do all that digging themselves rather than have anyone have the courtesy to contact them. That's not my question.
No. Okay. Good.
I have two questions. The first is, I think residents are really confused about what this decision is doing. On the one hand, you're saying it's authorising consultation. Well, actually, Norman, correct me if I'm wrong, I thought the council could go and consult without needing a cabinet member decision. You consult about all sorts of things, frankly, that people aren't very interested in. I would have thought you didn't need to decide in advance what the outcome would be on this. You've said that if you included other options, that would be disingenuous, which suggests well you've already made the decision, because you're saying it wouldn't be fair to residents to include other options in the consultation. Well then, frankly, what's the point of consulting full stop? It seems like you want to make the decision, then explain the reasons, so you don't even explain the reasons in the report, you explain it after you've made the decision, and then consult. And the language you use in the report is that residents will be allowed to inform the design process. So it's actually not a consultation about the site, it's a consultation once you've already decided the site. And I just think it's deeply offensive and unnecessary. And then I think, so my question is about consultation and why conversations haven't happened earlier. And the second thing it links to is there doesn't seem to have been any consultation about why you're not continuing to keep the existing Seven Islands site. I have looked very closely at the 2013 Area Action Plan and the 2014 Cabinet Report, and they don't ever explicitly say Seven Islands will be closed. They talk about investing over the short term, they talk about looking for new leisure centres in the long term, but they never, and the resident Tom said, they mention about, oh, well, residents...
Okay, let's get to a question, Denise.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just trying to, not everyone here... Well, no, I hope everyone here has read
Okay, let's get to the question, Mark.
Report. So, it says, the redevelopment of Seven Islands has been considered but rejected in your report. You claim that's because residents wouldn't have access to leisure facilities for 3 to 5 years. I don't know if there's been any consultation of residents whether they think that'd be a problem, and actually at the Elephant, the leisure centre's been closed, and people have generally been supportive of it being on site there. So that was the first reason you gave for not investing in the existing leisure centre. Secondly, you say it's not value for money.
Anoud, we need to get to a question here. This is just an elongated speech going through the papers. Let's get to a question so that the Cabinet member can answer it.
Okay. So my first question is whether there's been any consultation that residents would object to having the leisure centre refurbished, even if that took a little while. My second question is about you saying it's not value for money to extend Seven Islands. Where is there any evidence which shows the costing of that? Because I've looked in the November 2014 report and the Canada Water Area Action Plan of 2013. These are the different options. What are your views?
So I think it prefers